Well, so it's transactions to transition, correct? This is a most difficult one. I hope quite a number of politicians and policymakers in the room had quite a number of quotes to catch from both presentations. If I may, I would like to start, Paula, with you. 5 years programs, 5 years for regulatory framework, 5 years for infrastructure, 5 years for the transition to the knowledge-based economy. It looks like you have very clear steps in mind when building kind of 5 years after 5 years. First of all, who gave that advice to Rwandese government that start with regulatory framework, then go to infrastructure, don't mess with everything in the same time in parallel?
I don't know how to answer that question, but maybe I think the best thing to say is we had a task force, a think tank that was put together with the understanding that the vision was to transition into a knowledge-based economy, into a digital economy. And so the very first task that they were given was to say, what's the long list of things that need to be done? But beyond that long list, how are we supposed to sequence these things? And I think the task force really did a great job at really understanding that it had to be, systematically planned out, as opposed to starting with a bit of everything and when you don't have the building blocks in place. And of course, thanks to the leadership of our president and the political will, I think it was very clear that there had to be a systematic way of how we get to where we want to go, but also building in ways of measuring whether we have been able to achieve what we're trying to do along the 20 years that we're doing. And so even if we have the 5 years, we usually do what we call midterm reviews that happen every 2 years, more or less. At least within every 5-year plan, we have 2 midterm reviews. And the idea is for us to get a sense of what has been achieved. Are some of the things that have been outlined in this 5-year strategy still relevant? Because technology is evolving every day. Some of the things that we start to think about today, planning for 2024, might not be relevant by the time we get to 2021. And so that effort of really understanding and realigning some of these priorities and whether they still make sense or whether there's a better way of achieving some of these strategies and programs that we've put in place is what we do on a continuous basis.
Well, and that leads me to another clarifying question. How disappointing was your government when, you started around the mid of the century, around 2000, your projects, when suddenly a technology brought us smartphones? Everything was planned that we have a regulatory framework, we have a policies. How technology agnostic were you able to be and to adopt to those new technologies which now are, if we are saying about the continental Africa, then out of last 100 million internet users have never touched keyboard or mouse and never will. How big shock was the new technologies approach to the policies you have been planning?
I think to respond to your question, there wasn't a disappointment. And I think I alluded to it earlier. Because we've built in those midterm reviews halfway through every program to really assess what are the latest technologies that are going to afford us the necessary goals that we want to achieve and realigning with the current technologies. But I think one thing that I need to mention, Africa is special in the sense that we are the one continent that is heavily driven by mobile technology. So it didn't come by surprise. So even as we designed most of these programs and projects, we knew that the mobile interface was probably going to be the one thing that most of our citizens have direct access to. And going forward, I think it was very helpful to understand that as we digitize most of the services, as we look at all these platforms, we have to build in an option to think about, really, if you're talking about user friendliness, you're thinking about what's the most used technology by citizens. And to add to that, it's not just mobile devices. I think particularly for Africa, we have an interesting case where as much as the mobile technology has been revolutionary in the way we're achieving our digital economy agenda, not many people have access to smartphones. So at the end of the day, the majority have feature phones. And that's why today we are heavily, heavily reliant on USSD technology, because it's a click away, it's an SMS, it's something that is easily digestible by our citizens. So I think having built in those measures where we're able to quickly look at what are the digital literacy levels, how are the citizens responding to some of these things that we are putting in place, I think helps us to realign most of the programs that we have as a government.
Thank you. Shauneen, do you by any chance recall what is the current state IT budget in Canada? How big is CTO staff in Canada?
I'm sorry, I can't.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I can't answer because it might not be accurate.
Yeah. Me? Yeah. And it works.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Do I have to repeat that? Thank you for the question.
This is billions of Canadian dollars.
Oh, billions, yes. 10 years ago.
It's not millions, but billions.
In fact, 10 years ago, when we started the e-government project, we had the first $1 billion project, single project that was funded at $1 billion in order to produce what was called the Secure Channel for the Government of Canada. And that was a decade ago. That was one project.
So we understand also the magnitude of the projects we are talking about, and yet we are talking about kind of government policies which in most cases are in place, the digital goals which are in place, and translating those digital goals into a transformation is not taking place. That is one of your core arguments. It's government business as usual, and digitalization is just the kind of extending the life cycle of existing bureaucracies. Have governments recognized that by using the same way of budgeting and implementing the digital transformation project is not making an impact? Have they recognized it?
I believe that many government departments and many of our government direction actually has disincentives to advance in the digital transformational world because it's simpler and safer and more effective to stay within your own silo. You have your own set of jurisdictions, your own set of regulations, your own particular organizational culture, your own employee talent set, which is different from the rest of the government, and you're quite content with operating as an individual, in our case, as an individual federal department or as a separate and unique provincial department in our environment. So the modus operandi for us to operate digitally across governments, across departments, only allowed us to be effective and first in the world for a period because we had at that time a very enlightened a group of government politicians who made this a personal goal and agreed to be a sponsor at such a high level. I'll just mention one area that allowed us to be so successful is we had, and when I think back on it now, it was very daunting and perhaps a little irresponsible, but in order to make the move, we said we had to make our goal to be the most digitally enabled government of public service in the world. Within 5 years, we made that goal and we made it public. Now, many of you know that government bureaucrats, we tend not to make things public. We're quite happy to not have our government priorities in the newspaper, but this time we said we will put this in our biggest newspaper across the country that said that we would have this goal, and this was supported by our politicians, our Prime Minister at the time. This allowed us to push all those departments, all those silos who saw no interest in working together for us to say, you see, you have to work together because we have this goal to be the best in the world in 5 years. So it was a little Machiavellian, but it worked very well.
Yet we see a number of countries around the world. Embracing a very autocratic IT centralized management. And they have claimed that they do it with a high degree of success. What is your opinion? Do we need different tools for the project development and delivering those digital goals, or do we need a stronger and even heavier management policies?
Well, I believe from the work that I've done internationally is it should be done on two fronts. First, we do need different tools. Our project management methodologies are out of date. Change management is not recognized, and these 10 barriers that are outlined existed then and they exist today. So I believe that we do need different tools. I also recognize that another reason that we became first in the world is we purposefully, when we designed Government Online, we purposefully did not use the top CIO in each federal department for that very reason. We wanted innovation, unprecedented creativity, new direction, collaboration, and those CIOs were happy to be the head of the technical top dog in his individual department, and there was no motivation for him or her to work with another department. So one of the tools that we did was not to use the CIOs of each federal department to be on our Government Online e-government team. We used what we called an e-government lead. Now, it worked very well for us to have creativity. It caused some trouble in the fact that we had our most significant CIO group against the initiative because they were miffed by not being part of such an active, exciting project. So again, the lessons learned that we've picked up at the time.
Paula, how do you feel, you as a minister, do you see how the projects are being implemented? Do you get any, often the Minister of Road and Transportation doesn't need to know how the road or highway is built. You don't need to know exactly how the new runway at the airport is built. But do you, as a Minister of ICT, worry about how those digital goals are actually being implemented? Is there really a digital transformation also taking place?
I wouldn't say I worry because, and maybe it might help that I take you through how policy coordination is done from our side as a government of Rwanda, and some of the things that are built in to make sure that I can sleep at night and know that everything is working as has been planned or as outlined in our master plan. So essentially what happens is that at a policy level, we outline the key blocks, the key buckets of things that we wanted to achieve. And I'll give you an example, like the Smart Rwanda master plan that we're implementing today. You basically have something in the judiciary, you have programs under the healthcare, financial services, education, and all these other sectors.
And this is a digital mainstreaming, not putting digital as
Exactly.
a one policy.
Yes, so that's what I was leading. So it's not looking at the digital economy as a single siloed type of industry, but rather as an enabler and mainstreaming it across the sectors. A lot of what we do is it's a consultative approach. So we sit down and say, healthcare, what are you trying to achieve? And their response is probably going to be quality healthcare and access to healthcare.
And are they digitally advanced, your cabinet colleagues, to say, how can digital help me in healthcare?
Exactly. And they'll ask those questions because we'll say, these are your overall objectives. Agriculture is trying to increase, is trying to have more productivity. Healthcare, it's more access and quality healthcare. Education, definitely, it's really improving the skills. And so then we sit back and work with them and say, what are some of those digital solutions that are going to help you achieve what you're trying to achieve in a much more efficient manner? That is how we design most of the programs that are reflected in our strategic document. Now, what happens, earlier I mentioned that we have because at the ministry side, we're doing policy work. then we have an institution that works directly with us, and what they do is coordination of implementation across government. What we do is that for every sector, we put in place a chief digital officer whose role is constantly on a daily basis with their teams, and this is a team that has both business analysts as well as technology analysts. The reason we do that combination is because we've come from a structure where we had ICT units, and they were the kind of work they were doing was more of support nature, not the strategic role of understanding how do we use technology to transform these specific sectors and specific organizations. So the Rwanda Information Society Agency does coordination by having those chief digital offices in place that combine both business analysts and technology analysts to sit together and understand what technologies can we use to respond to the objectives and goals of each sector. Now, and so that helps. The other element that we build in is, because a lot of the planning for government is centralized at the Ministry of Economic Planning and Finance, as a government of Rwanda, I don't know for the other countries, is we also have put in place performance measurement tools. These performance measurements mean even I as a minister will have a performance contract that really outlines the things I need to achieve in a year. I'll sign off those things, and then there'll be mechanisms to track that this is happening at every institutional level. So it will happen between me and institutions reporting to me or the units under me. It will happen between me and the Prime Minister. It will happen between the Prime Minister and the President. So it's really a top-down, it's a mix of a top-down and bottom-up type of approach that allows that we are not just putting in place great policies and there is no way of managing the entire implementation and being able to measure the results. So the last thing I want to talk about that we've built in is we've also been able to distinguish between outputs versus outcomes. If I say I want a service access point, I will quickly build service access points in every district in Rwanda. But I think beyond having those infrastructures in the rural areas, why did we put them in place? To improve digital literacy levels. So how do we now measure outcomes? And usually outcomes can be measured post-implementing some of the things that we've put in place. So I think it's really a structured way of really ensuring that policies actually translate into action, actually translate into impact over time.
I agree. There are also many things we have done also in Estonia by building it first and finding how to measure the impact only later on, because when we are building the new, say, digital identity infrastructure or going out, for example, enabling people to participate over internet in elections, we have some sort of vague vision what it might look like. But then when it's there, you are only able to start measuring the impact of that. We have been also able to have feedback and questions from the audience. If we can bring some of them to the screen, I can assure already that there will be some very interesting ones, and addressing both of our speakers. I don't see them on the screen, so I will be asking myself one. And this is for you, Paula. And that was related to the question of leapfrogging technologies. What does digital leapfrogging mean for Rwanda? We have heard about leapfrogging in a number of cases. Is it only a technology, or is it also an approach how you adopt that technology?
I think for us it's been more around the approach, the use case applications, and I'm going to give a few examples just to put into context what I'm saying. As a country, we did not invent the drone technology. But what we did was to understand how do we use drones to respond to a need that was very specific to our kind of landscape. We're a very landlocked country. In terms of access to the rural communities, it's still very cumbersome in terms of the road infrastructure. And so we quickly worked with a company that was really looking at how to use drones to improve healthcare delivery. And so what we did that was very unique was to think about a use case application that would respond to a need that was very relevant to our own context. And so the first thing that we did was to say, in terms of improving healthcare, we have challenges, even making sure you have medical products sufficiently stocked in rural communities. The cost of investing in those in cold rooms to store blood, in all these current kind of storage facilities in every healthcare center across the country was going to be so high. So what else can we do to still ensure that hospitals and healthcare centers in rural communities still have access to the kind of medical products that they need? So we started off with blood. And so we're able to start transporting blood from a central location to these healthcare centers. What that did for us in terms of impact is that our journey that usually took us 3 hours to transport blood from the capital city to a rural hospital is now taking us 16 minutes with the drones. And we don't have to invest into storage facilities, cold rooms in every healthcare center, which is going to be very expensive. So that really gives you a context that for us, we look more at, can we use some of these emerging technologies, some of these fourth industrial revolution technologies to help us respond to a need that we already have in the country? Today we are talking about medical AI, where citizens can call and do consultations on the phone without having to go to a healthcare center. A lot of these are things that we're really leveraging some of these fourth industrial revolution technologies to create very unique use case applications. The last thing I want to talk about is around skills, because earlier when I did a presentation, I did show you that we have a digital literacy level. Well, the basic literacy is above 70, but digital literacy, we're still as low as 27%. So the more we put products online, the more we put services online, the more we transition into a digital economy, we're also very cognizant that we need to be able to build literacy levels of our citizens. And so what has happened over time is to craft what we've called the Digital Ambassadors Program, where we get university students, we place them in different communities, and they have a curated curriculum that they use across the entire country to really train citizens on how to use and consume digital products and services. And the way we do it in a way that allows us to train them on already existing applications. So it's not a general digital literacy training program, but rather specific to the applications that have been rolled out, whether it's from the government side or the private sector side.
Well, thank you. Shauneen, there is a one big why question which has been asked you to answer, and that why is really an essential one. Why is Canada? And I can assure this is not just a case of Canada, but can be extended to many OECD countries and well-developed world, also West European countries. Why is Canada not using the new agile way of developing, a new way of implementing both project results and the necessary changes related to those results? The question is very much around using a new agile development processes. Is it procurement that is not allowing to use those new approaches? Is it legacy methods of project management? What is the problem? Why not?
I would say when I say that our project management methodologies are anachronistic for an e-government environment, I'm saying that includes agile, because agile is used prolifically in Canada. I'm saying that all of our project management tools, including agile, are not technologically advanced, are not adequately results focused, are not able to address these barriers like conflicting stakeholders, project management as a driver, enterprise-wide needs, various different disparate organizations working together. Those methodologies, and we use many, and Canada is on top of them all. I am saying they are inadequate for the complexity and collaboration required for digital transformation. They have worked, and we use Agile, they have worked, in my estimation, in the transaction world. But for us to move to take technology, to inculcate it into the very heart of the business process in the Government of Canada's activities, the project management methodologies are inadequate in order to make that leap. And so if you were referring to the agile as one of the many project management methodologies, we're on top of them all. I happen to be a PMP, so I'm also in the world of professional project manager. So we're very familiar with these, and we're trying to develop them and use them to the degree that we can, but they are, in my opinion, inadequate for what we are trying to accomplish and the vision that we hope to have.
It reminds me like the big governments, especially like a Canadian one, are like huge oil tankers on the open ocean, where even to change the direction for 2 degrees causes already a kind of shift in the ballast and turbulence. Is it really so hard to change the path of the overall big government system?
Well, when we talk about, if we had a very clever solution, and I compliment my fellow speaker on using drones to transport blood, it is so evident and it's so creative and innovative that it allows the society and the government executives to support that initiative. If we find in other areas where it is not as obvious, when we do not know the outcome, when we say, what is the benefit of putting these various disparate federal departments together and sharing, for example, a shared service or sharing a Government of Canada pay system? We're currently having troubles in our country for a current pay system. So it is that these areas are affecting the intimate areas of business process, incentives for executives to advance their initiatives, business funding models, systems development activities that have public versus private sector relationships. It affects so many areas, detailed areas of our work and life structure. I would say that is the part that's hard for us to move this tanker. And it is easier for us to do smaller applications, but the reason that we're still talking about it today is because it is difficult. And internationally, we have not been as successful as we could be. I mentioned this WITSA group out of Washington. I've been also involved with the World Bank. I've also been involved with the United Nations University out of Macau. There are lots of very talented, educated, informed people trying to find mechanisms for us to make this advance. But this is a very big, complex problem. In fact, some people call it, using the mantra, a wicked problem. We need to use our technology in a smarter, more inculcated way into the work we do in order to manage the movement of this tanker more easily.
Let me describe a recent visit to a welfare European city where a local bus has an in-bus digital displays that show the route, including all the stops which are coming. And there is also electronic ticketing system, an NFC-based, installed to the bus. And in the same time, in the same bus, in the back there is sitting a conductor, as you know, a person who sells you tickets and shouts the names of the stops which are coming. When we talked with the mayor that, it's a very well advanced system. In all the buses you can buy electronic tickets, all the routes are digitally, all the transit stops can be seen. But why the people are still working also in the bus, shouting the names of the stops and also selling tickets to virtually nobody because everybody has electronic tickets. Then it was answered jobs and tradition. Those people have been used to go every morning for last 20 years to work for the local bus company and we can't take away those jobs from those people. And in the same time, in parallel, we have been using wisely also taxpayers' money to make a digitalization process to happen. Do we see a parallel processes like that also in other examples, except that small example of the bus, which has a legacy analog environment, which works actually, which works very well, and very advanced digital environment, which also works very well?
Well, so your comment makes me, reminds me of the huge value, a speaker mentioned earlier about the value of small countries and what they can show the rest of us that have not advanced currently to their degree. A smaller country may more easily adapt or have the vision or have the leadership that allows them to do something very creative and visionary, which then is used as an example to the rest of us. For example, in our country, we have separate identity cards for everything, and yet we're all talking about the fact that we need a single card, we need an electronic card. So we're doing lots of talking about it, and we have talked about it for the last decade. But I think it's very useful for us to use for our governments and our politicians and our business environments to say, it's not impossible. Look at Estonia. Look at our other colleagues who have been able to use this technology.
You know, we are known as an accepted statistical error. It doesn't help when you show that Estonia or Rwanda or somebody else can do it, because we are acceptable within the statistical error.
I still think it's an enlightenment that the rest of us can look at and say, we too can be an error.
Well, yeah, making errors more. Paula, very sensitive, but also very much up to the point question to you. What are the policy frameworks in place to ensure Rwandan e-developments stride sustainability after President Paul Kagame's tenure? Do you see that there is a process which is not dependent on one leader, one vision, and one driver? The mic is off on a very right moment.
I think the simple answer to that is what President Kagame has done is to build institutions. And even when he's not there, institutions will continue to deliver. I think he's done a great job at creating a vision that everyone believes in, every citizen believes in. He's done a great job at building institutions that are supposed to not only take us to the next level, but are also supposed to sustain the gains that we've achieved as a country. So that's as simple as I can respond to that. I don't think that whether the president was there or not will affect the amount of progress that we've achieved as a country.
Thank you. It's a very good answer. Do you, Shauneen, see that there is a need for more centralized visionary policies, or can it be at all achieved in the context of Canada, for example? Because institutions are there, correct. There is a very clear institutional and governance environment and framework, and yet, as you reflected, something is missing. And probably it's not only the project management methodology, but something more is missing on top of that. Project management methodology is rather something which we understood, well, you adopt it or not, but there is something more, a level higher that is missing.
When I mentioned, I refer to it as in the missing link in the digital transformation comprised of two components. One is an integrated, automated project management methodology that includes a commitment to a conscious change leadership. And that is a different element. That is an element that says that the influence of the leader is phenomenal when you're trying to drive a complex change management initiative. So yes, the person does make a difference. Their vision and their work attitudes and their direction and their ability to understand the impact of what they do to the people that work with them and whether or not our people are excited to work with them makes a very big difference. It also works if that leader is embodied with the authority in order to make a difference. The authority to have that creativity and have that vision and take that risk and be safe from that risk. One of the many jobs when I was in the e-government world, when I took over doing the e-government policy for one particular federal government department, what I was given as a gift was, in order to have the right to fail, if you are designing a system that is so innovated and outside of the box and something totally different, if you are succeeding in putting in your information systems and you are succeeding with 100% success and your metrics are being met 100% of the time, then I say you're failing because you are not reaching far enough. It is a very safe environment to work in a transactional world. We serve a million hits on this and so on. It's very safe, it's easy to achieve, and you say, what a great job I did. But I say we're not using technology to the degree that it can be by having this innovative vision, which is often developed by having a committed, very senior person. I mentioned in our case, we used our Prime Minister when we published it, when we made it a public document that would be our goal, and that we have the funding and the support and the risk management tools behind it in order to be that creative and successful. If not, the success that you achieve will be the mundane and the status quo, which is where many of countries have hit, including Canada to some degree. But I'm very optimistic that with the recognition that the world is moving and the technology will become inculcated as it's moved into our social media worlds, now it is the time that I believe the politicians and the executives will more readily incorporate it into our business process models and to our individual work structures.
Thank you so much. And this will lead me to the final question to both panelists of this visions track. Innovation is doing something new, something which you have never done before. Imagine yourself, if you are doing something which you have never done before, how likely is that you always succeed with the first attempt? No, innovation means also failures. And those failures you were also talking about, trying to achieve more. 100% of the goals met means you either lie or you don't try enough. So the question to both of you, do you see the tolerance of making errors, tolerance of going out, being bold, innovative, and going then out to public and say, I tried to be innovative. I tried to achieve something nobody else has done before. And I failed, and I learned something about it. You can learn only from your own failures. Do you see that practice evolving in some government levels? Are governments allowed by society to be innovative, bold, and also make some mistakes?
This is a very good question, and I think we've had this discussion with many of our teams back home where we're like, how do we create an environment that tolerates failure? Not failure from doing things, but failure from trying things. I think we need to make a very clear distinction between those two. Because also you don't want to promote a culture where people are just failing to do things and you know, under that same framework, everyone, you know, gets away with it. And I think, like you rightly said, yes, innovation is about creating new opportunities. Innovation is about creating new business models and new ways of thinking. And in doing that, some things are going to work, others are not going to work. How then do we create a space that allows for you to fail fast, F-A-S-T, not F-I-R-S-T, to fail fast, but also pick up from those lessons learned and quickly try another way of doing things. And I think for us as a government, that's one thing that we've tried to do. Now, this is a concept that is probably more entertained in the private sector. There's even resources that are put at the disposal to allow for those kinds of failures to happen, because in doing so, you are actually going to bring in revolutionary solutions and business models. On the government side, I believe we can do that. And there are certain things we can put in place, things that we like to call pro-innovation policies. Recently, we were launching, we wanted to move away from really the strict procurement processes of government, like any public sector, where when we're procuring goods or services, what we're looking for is experience, is reference that something has been done elsewhere. And we said, how are we going to empower our startups if we don't carve out certain laws and strategies that allow for us to try the untried solutions that are already within the industry? And there are ways you can achieve that. Even things like, sandboxes. Creating regulatory sandboxes is one good thing, because what you do is that you create a parameter through which people can fail in creating solutions for government. But in doing so, whatever solution is able to withstand that regulated environment that you've created for that sandbox facility, then you're going to get something that can then be replicated and scaled to the rest of government. So I think that's one way for us to tolerate failure in a very contained environment that does not create effects that are going to be more damaging to the citizens. So regulatory sandboxes give us that opportunity. The second bit is even through these kind of competitions that are run within the private sector, because what you do is you put out a problem statement, everyone will bring something on the table, you go through a downsizing process that allows you to eventually lead to 3 or 5 solutions that can then be tested in that regulatory sandbox. So personally, I think governments, we should be open to this kind of failures that come with trying and testing new solutions, but do it through those regulatory sandboxes, because that's the benefit of having them.
Shauneen, could you share your advice on how to tolerate failures, how to encourage innovation culture?
I have three thoughts. Number one, because of technology now that is so prolific and ubiquitous, the technology itself is pushing the business models to say, we're not going to tolerate these old-fashioned traditions in our work life when I can have these great technology solutions in my personal life. And so it's through the ability to understand what the technology can do will make you more demanding as an employee. It will make you more creative as a leader to say, I think we can do these ideas. So that's one step. A second step is to make the business models no longer celebrate or have the funding criteria is based upon saving this little bit of money. Don't make it a public cry to say, I'll put in this new system and all you public, I want you to support it because I'm going to save 1%. What the business model should say is, we're going to put in this new system, it's going to cost 10% more, and you are going to have an added value as a citizen because you're able to do this and that, which you could never do before. So I think we hurt ourselves by keeping our demands small, by putting in those requirements. And then thirdly, I think we should celebrate these innovative solutions. In the Government of Canada, one of our lessons learned was we worked in a central agency, I worked in a central agency, we had a pot of money, we had a pot of a lot of money, And because it was too high risk for the Deputy Minister of National Defence and the Deputy Minister of Health Canada to work together, was too high risk, there was not a common ground, neither one of them wanted to fund their project, we said, we as a central agency, if you can come up with a creative idea, we will fund your creative idea that allows you to work together, and we will celebrate and market your idea. So as a deputy minister for a department in the Government of Canada, you would not be publicly celebrated ever. In fact, most of our governments, most of our executives would not like that. But because we said we're going to do something this innovative, this high-end, we made it celebrated, and you've got career opportunities, you've got regional opportunities that did not exist before, only by the fact that you two deputy ministers will work together on something very innovative and different and to make a difference. And so those three ideas, I think the time is now for us in order to make these different, and to have more of us get on that bus that sees all these things on the bus and see the redundance of the fellow at the back calling out the stops. Pretty soon we're going to say, gee, he could be doing something else. But the societal demand will, in my view, will make that happen.
I think as she was speaking, I thought of something. Because we're talking about taxpayers' money, I think that there's a concept that as governments we need to be able to embody, and that's agile implementation. Being able to structure piecemeal implementation where you test assumptions on a very small scale, and once that has been successful, then you scale your solution. And I think that will create value for money for our citizens who are paying to have these solutions, but also it allows for that innovative approach and learning process to happen, as opposed to wanting to implement very sophisticated large systems in one go. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm calling up every country to have at least one day a year to celebrate digital innovations as an official holiday. Better if you have 100 days a year where out of those 100 days, every day you celebrate innovations at least for 20 minutes. And without further ado, thank you so much. Give a big hand to Paula and Shauneen.